Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ypres and this is A War to End All Wars, Home Front Propaganda, the Great War Week 13. Oh, we're going to see propaganda here. The first week of war already took hundreds of thousands of lives. In 1 week, holy shit, in 1 week, hundreds of thousands of lives. The daily struggle to survive in the trenches on the Western Front has nothing to do with the promised glory. Back home, propaganda is already working and grotesquely distorting the public's opinion about the war. While the British civilians feared a German invasion, some of the leading German scientists and intellectuals published the Manifesto of the 93, in which they rallied for solidarity with the Germans. Damn, so propaganda was running from all sides. Like a Manifesto of the 93, is that something, famous thing or something? Manifesto, alright. So yeah, I mean, so far this has been really fucked up, right? I mean, war, it's just, no wonder they called it the Great War, because no war before this was even close to this, right? Hundreds of thousands of, dead just in first weeks of war, right? It just few weeks happen and there you go. Okay. So let's watch this one. Remember, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe, check out the reaction, there's a link in the description, check out the cast for place, and yeah, let's watch it.
Europe had been at war for less than 3 months, but already hundreds of thousands of young men had died horribly. In the interest of
3 months, right? 3 months. Imagine that, 3 months. I mean, I'm trying to think right now, it's what, September, right? So 3 months. It's like nothing. And realizing I'm living at that time, imagine that. And it's been 3 months. Hundreds of thousands of people died. That's a big number, man.
Morale and patriotism, the media in each warring nation had portrayed its side as good and the enemy as evil. And what we begin to see is that there was a gap created between what people believed about the war at home and what was actually happening on the front. I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to the Great War. At the beginning of the week, the Russians were crossing the Vistula to try and stop the Germans, who were intent on capturing Warsaw. The Austrians had broken out of the siege at Przemysl, but were badly beaten by the Russians on the River Seine, and the British had just arrived at a sleepy little Belgian town called Ypres. German Army Chief of Staff Falkenhayn had assembled a new army under the Duke of Württemberg to take over the right flank of the German forces in Flanders, which is this part of Belgium and northern France. A lot of the new units were reservists, though, middle-aged men past campaigning, or young recruits that hadn't really been trained, and in their first few days of battle, they would make catastrophic mistakes. Now, the only gap on the Western Front through which either side might possibly make some sort of decisive maneuver was a narrow corridor right here.
So technically, nobody was prepared in World War I, right? Since they're using the reserves like that. Untrained people, basically. Young, untrained people, right? Who don't know what the fuck they're doing because they're not trained, but they have to throw them on the battlefield. So no country was basically preparing for this shit. I mean, nobody was like, okay, war, this kind of war, if happens, do we have soldiers? Nobody was preparing for that. I mean, obviously, we've seen how the war started, right? Everything that, happened since, shooting of the Archduke and how all the background politics happened. Nobody wanted this scale of war, but it happened.
And that's where the action was happening. On Sunday, October 18th, the British headed eastward from Ypres towards Menin, nearly 20 kilometers away and in German hands. And there were a few skirmishes, but nothing major. The next day, as the advance progressed, British pilots reported huge columns of advancing Germans who would be upon them in hours, so the British withdrew to a low ridge overlooking Ypres. This area would be known as the Ypres salient. Now, a salient in battle is a projection of the line like a bulge, which means that the enemy can attack it on 3 sides. The Ypres salient would be the scene over the next 4 years of some of the bloodiest and harshest battles in all of human history. On the 20th, the Germans attacked along the whole front, 24 divisions against 19.
Every time there's a German scene, they are always with this kind of a fucking, belt-fed machine gun.
The main contest this day was at Ypres, where 14 German divisions attacked 7 British, though most of the German forces were Württemberg's reservists. The British were outnumbered in men and artillery, but they were equal to the enemy in machine guns, and they managed to hold their line because of their superiority in rapid rifle fire. Now here we find, as we did at the Battle of the Mons in August, the stories of the Mad Minute. A mad minute was, according to the British soldiers of the Great War, the art of hitting 15 targets in 1 minute with a bolt-action rifle, which the British professionals were trained to. And legend has it that at both Mons and the first action at Ypres, German soldiers thought they were facing machine gun fire when in fact it was only intense rifle fire. The German forces made the novice's mistake of advancing in large masses and presented huge targets to the British rifles, suffering terrible casualties. And for the next 3 days, they continued banging their heads against the British lines, attacking by both day and night on a widening front. Looking at it objectively,
Still trying to process that, right? Bolt action rifles, they shoot 15 targets a minute, everybody, right? So it feels like they are getting bombarded by machine guns. So Germans are, holy shit, they have machine guns. That is ridiculous. I mean, obviously Germans had machine guns. They were, basically trying to, plow everybody with belt-fed machine guns. The British, they were more, I guess, specific with the bolt action rifles, right? More trained like that. Trying to attack 50 targets, everybody basically. So Germans like, oh, there's too many bullets, so it has to be a machine gun.
after the fact, these attacks were exercises in futility along the lines of the French attacks we saw at the Battle of the Frontiers in August, with devastating losses for the Germans, and the salient held. Those Germans were volunteers, doing their part for the fatherland, and they had heard for 3 months that the British troops were a joke and would be easily overcome, so they rushed off to die. On the British side, we also see the public failing to understand what was actually happening.
Look, I don't understand this. Alright, I get it. There are, ups and downs throughout times. But when has ever in history British has been a joke? I mean, World War I, before World War I, I mean, for centuries, British has been dominant, right? I mean, there is ups and downs, right? You can pick out certain time where, other countries are more somewhat powerful than British. But overall, British has never been weak. So thinking, oh, British, they are weak, they're untrained, fuck it, let's just go, it's going to be easy. How does that even work?
British General Smith Dorrien wrote, quote, "I was struck by the fact that people in England didn't in the least realize the strenuous nature of the fighting at the front, or that we were a long, thin line, without reserves, which might be broken through at any time. Their minds seemed set on what appeared to me a ridiculous fear of an invasion of England," end quote. There was no danger of that at the moment.
I mean, you can't blame them, right? I mean, if you go that close, if you go through Belgium, right, attack France, of course, England is going to fear that invasion might happen, right? If you think that's a bit paranoid, I mean, looking how US works in past, few decades, that's ridiculously paranoid then. Because obviously, if you want to protect your country for national security, basically, you have to have massive amount of paranoia. Obviously, lots of time that's not required, but you never know, right? It takes only one mistakes. So British basically thinking at that time, okay, there could be invasion of England. We have to fight any means necessary. That's not really far-fetched, right? I mean, they went through Belgium to attack France, and they wanted to take France immediately. So obviously, England is going to be like, holy shit, we are threatened.
For it was true stalemate in Belgium and would be for the next 4 years. Further north along the line, the remnants of the Belgian army, now down to around 60,000 men, were holding the coast at Newport, at the mouth of the Ypres River. The Ypres is a narrow river, but it has embankments, and it was a major military obstacle for the Germans. And the Belgians fought valiantly, earning the praise of even their enemy, who were unable to break through. There were, however, breakthroughs on the Eastern Front, where the war had become a war of perpetual motion for the time being. The Russians had been sending troops across their bridgehead on the Vistula River for over a week now, fighting off the Germans who had been trying to take Warsaw. Early on, the Germans had the advantage, but Generals Hindenburg and Ludendorff had completely underestimated the size of the enemy, as Russian reinforcements never stopped coming in, being cleverly and secretly well deployed by the Russians. From October 18th to 23rd, the Russian army, after weeks of preparations, began its own attack, even threatening to surround the Germans, who began to retreat on the 20th, realizing that with the mud and the sheer number of opponents, they would not be able to take Warsaw.
All right. I just saw, that image, and only thing I can think of, like horses, soldiers on horses with sabers, right? I mean, World War I in a way was a weird time, right? Where there was introduction of the new weapon, but also old weapons were still there. People were still riding horses with saber, while there were people who were artillerists, bolt action rifles, machine guns. It was a mix of everything. I don't know how that worked, right? I don't know which war was that, but isn't there I don't know, a case where in somewhere in Ukraine, I guess, right? In somewhere in Ukraine, there is a whole battlefield area where in a British chain of command basically gave a wrong information. So everyone with sabers and horses basically ran, forwards just to realize that they are way far off, and they just came into the, I guess, crossfire of the artillery of the enemies. So these are literally, soldiers with sabers on horses charging, blindly at somewhere, realizing that they just missed their marks while, they were directly at the firing line of the artillery of the enemy. Every one of them died, got mowed down, obviously. But imagine that scenario, how fucked up that is. You have sabers with you, while the enemy has actually, ballistic weapons, long distance weapons. And now, basically order got fucked up and you charged the wrong place. That is just horrible.
Further south, the Austrian Chief of Staff Conrad tried again to take on the Russians with his army, this time at Ivangorod. This was not as prudent as the German retreat. On the 22nd, the Austrians attacked, and 4 days later, they were forced to retreat, with 40,000 Austrian casualties. Once again, the Russians would surround Przemysl fortress, garrisoned by 150,000 men, and it would once again be an Austrian island in an ocean of Russian territory. And since I mentioned oceans, we should turn our attention to the Yellow Sea, where the Japanese had the German port of Tsingtao under total blockade. This week, the German torpedo boat S-90 slipped out of the harbor and sank the Japanese cruiser Takachiho with a single torpedo. 271 sailors were drowned. The S-90 was, however, unable to run the blockade and returned to Tsingtao afterwards, and was scuttled by the Germans when she ran low on fuel. There was one very important non-battlefield event that happened this week that really shows the divide between the reality of the battlefield and what the public thought at home. This week saw the signing of the Manifesto of the 93. What this was a proclamation by 93 famous German artists, scholars, and scientists giving their total support to the German cause in the war. In the comments section, you can find a link to read the whole thing yourself. But basically, it says that the signers are responding to the lies of their enemies. They say that it is not true that Germany caused the war, and it is not true that Germany trespassed in neutral Belgium or carried out the reported atrocities there, such as the destruction of Louvain. Everything was done in self-defense. A counter-manifesto, the Manifesto to Europeans, was drafted by the pacifist Professor Nicolai, but gathered only 3 signatures. And one of them had actually also signed the other manifesto. The other 2 who signed were both scientists, Otto Buch from Heidelberg and a scientist from Switzerland named Albert Einstein.
Damn, man.
So at the end of the week, the Austrians are defeated once again. The Germans are retreating from the Russians.
I see that in current times too, at specific times where, certain artists and well-known celebrities, sure, right, well-known names and celebrities basically support a certain cause, right, because they think it's loyalty to their nation, even though they might be, and their nation is the one who's in the wrong, right? I'm not going to say anything specific, but, I've seen that many times. Right, artists of that country, basically artists, celebrities of the country, support their own country at the time, their own government at the time, because they think it's more patriotic, even though they are in the wrong, right? Thinking that it's just patriotic, I have to support my nation. No, right? First of all, your nation's government is doing something that is fucked up. If you support that, you are just as fucked up as that, right? I mean, when you have certain level of fame, your artist, you're well-known, you're celebrity, then you have responsibility, right? If you just support your country blindly because you think it's patriotism, it's not, right? I mean, if your country is doing something fucked up, it's your job to criticize this if you see it like that, right? So anytime an artist or some celebrity supports something blindly because they think it's patriotism, that's just fucked up.
The war is heating up in the Far East, and on the Western Front, huge German offensives are being stopped with devastating losses in men, many of them too young or too untrained to belong in battle. Lloyd George, the British Chancellor of the Exchequer and later Prime Minister, made one of the most legendary speeches of the war on September 19th to address the costs of the war. He said that this war a war to end all wars, was being fought to free Europe from the rule of a military caste, and that the people of the Allied nations would in the end gain more than they could comprehend in a new moral regeneration and a political rejuvenation and realignment. This was a bill of false goods, because when none of this happened in 1918, the anger and disillusionment of the people was enormous. He could have simply chosen to tell the truth, that the British, French, and Russians had to pay a terrible price in blood to lose the cream of a generation to win a victory that really gave no new advantages, but that this sacrifice must be borne simply to avoid worse things if Germany won the war. After watching our weekly episodes, you might have some questions about certain...
I don't know what to say to that. I'm not gonna lie. I don't know what to say to that. I mean, it is war, right? You can't let enemy nation win and take over places, even though at the time I highly doubt Germany would have taken over places like how Nazis wanted, right? At World War I don't think Germany wanted that. I don't think Germany wanted to take over all the places that they could. But then again, you can never be sure. But to the people in England, France, and everywhere, basically they had this task that we have to stop Germany, otherwise we fucked. What to tell our people, how to sell it. They decided to sell it saying, oh, we're gonna get, it's gonna be so much good after all, right? Everybody helping around will have benefits, right? Everybody will have some kind of equal rights, minorities will be recognized more and whatever. They said all that shit. Obviously, that was not the case, but they just said that because they needed people to fight. Now, if they had said, truthfully, like, okay, nothing's going to change, right? But we are only doing this so things don't go to worse, I guess, if Germany takes over everything. So we're just fighting to preserve what we already have. Nothing will get better, but at least something will not get worse. If they said that, well, people would have just come forward like they did. I don't know what to think at that point. Obviously, I like to think like, okay, duping people is not a good thing, but I don't know. It's not always as simple as that. It was a wartime, so... But yeah, this was really the great. They thought this is the war to end all wars. Yeah, man, I don't think so. In few decades, yeah, it's gonna be even more ridiculous. Granted that how Allied handled things after this World War I probably fueled that, but yeah, still. Damn. Alright, people, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out the reaction. This is a decision. Check out the cards for place. Check out the cards. And yeah, I'll see you next time.